Thank you so much for spending this evening with us. It's a huge pleasure to have all of you here. Just before we start, a couple of announcements. Please don't record this event, either by video or audio. We've got a recording here, and we'll be putting it up on our YouTube channel. So, the format of this evening is going to be about an hour of talk, followed by a conversation with Mr. Dalrymple, and a Q&A with the audience. There will be time for book signings at the end, and there are books available for sale outside. So welcome. This evening wouldn't have been possible without Uday Kulkarni, our dear friend. Uday, thank you. About a year ago, Uday came and spoke at the Loft and shared his amazing work on Bajirao with us. And that evening, the seeds of this talk were sown when he said, I know William, and we should try and bring him here. And I said, that's amazing. He's been somebody who we've been wanting to bring for the longest time. And so, Uday, thanks so much for making this happen. This evening wouldn't have been possible, and we wouldn't be in this amazing hall without the Pune Music Society and the kind of work that they've done behind the scenes to make this happen. A big thank you to the Pune Music Society. Jahangir and Binaifa, thank you so much for all the work behind the scenes. And for those of you who do not know, for those of you who are new, who are coming to the Mazda Hall for the first time, I know there are many of you who are coming here for the first time. The Pune Music Society is simply, in my opinion, the best music society in the country. We have an absolutely hidden gem in Pune, and we are extremely fortunate to have them here. The NCPA does a lot of amazing music, but they also do many other things. But the Pune Music Society is the only society in the country that does amazing concerts year in, year out, brought to us by the absolutely dedicated team. If any of you are not members, there are forms outside. Please support the society. Please attend their events. Share about them, and they have a website, punamusic.com. So thanks so much to the Pune Music Society. William will be in conversation with Vinuta Malia, a friend of ours. Vinuta, thank you for being here. Vinuta is an editor, publisher, a publishing consultant, and a journalist, and she's currently features assistant editor with the Pune Mirror. Vinuta, thanks for being here. So at the Loft, we've been really interested in history, and there is no better time to be talking about history and its importance than in our current daily lives. History and knowing our history has never been more important and relevant than in the time that we live in now. Without knowing our history, we do not have the tools to navigate what is happening around us. So it is a huge pleasure to have William Dalrymple with us here today, someone who has really made history accessible, interesting, fun, and enjoyable for so many thousands of and millions of people. His books have won numerous international and national awards. He is one of the co-founders and the co-director of the Jaipur Literature Festival, which is now going all over the world. He has taught at Princeton and Brown, and in 2018 he was the President's Medal. He was awarded the President's Medal of the British Academy. William, thanks for being with us.
So for the next hour or so, I'm planning to talk about this innocent little sparkler on the screen in front of you that looks as if butter wouldn't melt in its mouth. But this small gem has caused more mayhem, bloodshed, torture, coup d'etats, assassinations, and acts of unbelievable horror than any other sort of object of its sort in world history. It's like the ring of power in Lord of the Rings. Wherever it goes, it turns men into monsters. And still, it has this power. As we speak, there are 5 countries which claim this diamond. Obviously India, almost certainly the source of the diamond, but also Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Iran, suitably enough for a Parsi hall, and a late 6th claimant put in their credentials just at the turn of the millennium, which was the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. In other words, the Taliban. Mullah Omar had not previously been known for his interest in jewelry, and it's not clear where he posted this claim from, which cave acted as the conduit, but he also claimed it on behalf of the Islamic Emirate. And one of the features that attracted Anita Anand, who co-wrote this book with me, and I to this story, was that here was an object which was incredibly famous, particularly in this part of the world, perhaps more so here than Europe, where it now is, about which huge numbers of people care very, very deeply and are incredibly angry about in a large number of countries. And yet, actual historical facts about this diamond are increasingly insubstantial the more you research it. And Anita and I found that this small gem has become like a focus for all the pain and anger generated by centuries of imperialism, colonialism, and looting. And that onto it has been placed the fury and anger and disappointment of a whole variety of different peoples across the world over what Europe has done to this part of the world. And yet the actual historical truth about this diamond remains extremely hazy. The version you read about, if you go onto any previous magazine article or television documentary or books or websites, of which there are a surprising number about this diamond, goes something like this. The Kohinoor was discovered by enslaved miners deep underground in the Golconda mines near Hyderabad. It was placed in the eye of an idol that ultimately found its way into a temple of the Kakatiya dynasty until the Delhi Sultans came south and smashed the idol, seized it back to Delhi, and then it passed like a bad penny on from dynasty to dynasty, from the Khaljis to the Lodis, from the Lodis to the Saids, from the Saids to the Lodis, Lodis to the Mughals, and then through the Mughals until the last of the Mughals to have it, Muhammad Shah Rangila, hid it in his turban, allegedly, when Nadir Shah came to stay on an unwelcome visit to the Red Fort. Unfortunately, both he and Nadir Shah were sleeping with the same courtesan, Nobai, and as part of the pillow talk, she revealed where Muhammad Shah Rangila had hidden this diamond. So as they departed, Nadir Shah embraced Muhammad Shah Rangila and said, "My brother ruler, this has been such a pleasure coming to loot your city. As a measure of our friendship, let us exchange turbans." And so it was, according to this story, that the diamond went off to Persia. Now, to use a technical term, every single one of the facts I've just laid out for you is bullshit. There is not a single item of substantiated truth in any of those stories. And in actual fact, it is impossible to say anything about the ancient history of this diamond with certainty before about 1750, when one of Nadir Shah's contemporary biographers, a man called Muhammad Yazdi, writes in his biography that the Kohinoor diamond lay as the eye of the peacock on the top of the peacock throne, which at that stage had been taken from Delhi to Afghanistan, where it was put on stage. And that is the first and only reference we have to what is definitely the Kohinoor around 1750. Before that, it almost certainly was in the Mughal collection. Obviously, when the Kohinoor was made, it's unlikely to have been added later. So it was in Delhi in 1640, but before that we can say almost nothing. But what has happened, and what I would hope to show over the next hour or so, is that the fact that this diamond became so incredibly famous after 1850, when it was taken from India and put on show in the Great Exhibition in London. After this became the symbol of imperialism for the British, they took it and made it into the symbol of their empire. After that, every reference in the Baburnama, in previous chronicles about large diamonds was assumed to be the Kohinoor. And a history was created for this stone, when in actual fact there were many other equally large or larger Mughal diamonds which could be referred to. There are about 5 massive Mughal diamonds that we know about. The most famous of which is the Daryanur, said to be the sister of the Kohinoor, which is a large, flat, pink diamond, now in Tehran. And a stone that the French jeweler Jean-Baptiste Tavernier saw on his visit to Aurangzeb's Delhi, when it was shown to him. And that diamond almost certainly is now in the scepter of Catherine the Great in the Kremlin. And those are both as big, if not larger, than the Kohinoor. So what you have, and this is very interesting in a time when history increasingly is about passion and belief and less about facts and research, when historical grievances and historical preferences take precedence over deeply researched factual history. The Kohinoor can be held up as a very good example of a diamond which has had history imposed on it subsequently. And what I hope to try and do in the next 45 minutes is to give you what we came to a conclusion, me, a Brit living in India, and Anita, a Sikh living in London, as the factual history of the diamond that can be substantiated from primary sources. It's not a final account sheet for this diamond. Other discoveries may come forward. There may be a huge amount of material in Sanskrit or Persian, which has not yet emerged. But I think what we have assembled are the facts as they stand today. And the reason particularly that we went about this was that when we started, there was an announcement by the Indian Solicitor General prior to a visit of Theresa May to the country that the Kohinoor was not loot, that it had been given by Ranjit Singh as a present to the British, therefore need not be an issue between the countries and could be handed back. Now, both Anita and I, who'd been working separately on this period, knew for a fact that that was wrong, because the diamond was in fact given at the time of Dulip Singh, 1849, at the Treaty of Lahore, after the Second Anglo-Sikh War, and when Ranjit Singh had been in his grave 12 years. So unless he gave it through a Ouija board or astral projection, the official version of the government of India's story was obviously completely wrong. And again, it's a measure of the tricksiness of this diamond, that this diamond, which is such a major international issue, the facts can be so unclear that the government can put forward as its formal position something which is clearly factually wrong. So we wrote this book to try and establish what could be said about the truth. So let's say what we can say about, first of all, diamonds in general, then the Kohinoor in particular. Can we have the light slightly down so we can see the slides slightly better? So, until the discovery of the New World mines in Brazil in the mid-18th century, all the diamonds in the world came from India. Small exception, black diamonds from the mountains of Sarawak, of which there were very few in circulation. But basically, any large pink, yellow, or blonde diamond that you see that predates the mid-18th century came from this country. And diamonds were one of India's first great exports. They were known in about 3,000 or 4,000 BC in China as the hardest material on earth. They were quite probably used in the cutting of the stones of the pyramids in ancient Egypt. By the time of Augustus, the 1st century CE, AD, they were fashion items. They were used in rings in Rome, a fashion that started in Gandharan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that sort of northern Indian, southern Central Asia region, where you can still find in the British Museum and in the Met 1 or 2 gorgeous examples of very Hellenized rings with sort of classical dolphins rising to a round bezel. And coming out of that, a single, natural, uncut octagonal diamonds. Because diamonds in their natural state are not the kind of perfectly symmetrical objects that you see in jewelers, which people wear at weddings and so on. They are long, thin cylinders, usually octagonal. And in ancient India, they were not mined. The greatest diamonds came from the Golconda estuary, where they were found in dead riverbeds. And you got these diamonds by panning for them. So take away that image in the old movies of sort of King Solomon's mines with slaves shackled together with pickaxes, working away underground. And instead think of something more like the kind of American gold rush, with people with sieves sieving through sand, and eventually maybe, if they're incredibly lucky, maybe once or twice in a lifetime, they might find one of these natural, octagonal, cylindrical objects. And given that this was the home of many of the most valuable gems in the world, and that gemology was one of the great qualities and specialities of ancient India, you find in Sanskrit a whole variety of texts about diamonds and other gems, and always in the early period related to astrology, as it is today. The diamonds and other gems channel divine influences and can impact on people's prosperity or otherwise. And diamonds are particularly tricksy in ancient Indian gemology. A perfect diamond, one that's totally unclouded, that has no crow's feet, is the most valuable thing a man can possess. And a king, it says in several of the ancient texts on ancient gemology, are things which only kings or viziers should hold. But if they are clouded, or have crow's feet, or have markings on them, rather than bringing good luck and auspiciousness, they can bring incredible bad luck. And if it's worn by the wrong person, if the person is not a perfect person, if it's not a king or of the highest caste, it can bring incredible and channel incredible bad luck. And one of the stories that early channels this information is the Bhagavad Purim. This is an 18th century Rajasthani rendition of the story when the Syamantika gem, which is this shiny object here, usually said to be a diamond, sometimes said to be a ruby, comes down to Dwarka. It is the gem which emits the radiance of the sun god Surya. And one of Surya's devotees stands in ancient Dwarka, summons the sun god down, and he gives the Syamantika gem to him. And it's then given to the king of Dwarka, who gives it to his brother. The brother takes it into the forest, and immediately a whole chain of violence begins. The king's brother is killed by, I think, a lion, who then has it stolen from him by a bear. Krishna goes into the forest to look for it, battles the bear, who turns out to be a demigod himself. And at the end of this battle, he gives the diamond back to Krishna. Krishna gives it to his father-in-law, only for it again to cause another chain of violence. And these robbers break in, they kill the king. Here's all the blood as the king's body is separated from his head. There's another version of it. Wives running off stage right, more wives pulling out their hair on top. And so you get this idea very early on in the Bhagavad Purim, written down for the first time in the early centuries AD, but bringing together stories that had existed for much longer, that diamonds can be cursed objects, that they're objects which bring bad luck. And this is an idea which travels through Indian literature, finds its way ultimately into Victorian literature, like the Moonstone, and I suppose ends up in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Hollywood. But this is an idea that starts in India. So for ancient India, a good diamond was the summit of the gemological pyramid. It was the Raja or Maharaja of gems. But and in ancient Indian courts, this is a wonderful apsara in the Metropolitan Museum. You see quite often people with very little clothes worn in ancient Indian courts, just gems. So what gems you wore and who could wear which gem is laid down in all these texts. Now when the Mughals turn up, they come with an entirely separate gemological tradition. As with so much of Indian culture, at the time of Islam, whether with the Sultanates or with the Mughals, a whole new set of influences in music, in food, in language, in architecture, come in, and it's in the meeting of these ideas that you get so much of current Indian culture. But with the Mughals, they bring an idea that it isn't diamonds which are the king of gems, it is red stones of light, which for most of Iranian history meant spinels, not a stone we particularly value today. These are the equivalent of rubies found in Badakhshan and Central Asia. They're red stones. And then when rubies begin to come in from Burma and Sri Lanka, rubies take their place. So the gems that the Mughals really value are like the Timur ruby, which is passed on from Shah Abbas, ends up with Humayun and Timur before him, and passes down. And these red stones reflect a lot of the poetry about gems in Persian literature that comes in now with the Mughals. And so when Akbar is describing his treasury, or rather when Abul Faisal is describing it for Akbar in the Aini Akbari, he talks about the rubies as being in the top tier of the imperial Mughal treasury, and diamonds are relegated to the second, along with pearls and emeralds and lesser gems. So the Mughals are not actually that keen. They love diamonds, but they prefer spinels and rubies. They like the red stones. Nonetheless, they obsess about gems in a way that no other rulers in India are recorded as having done so. And you get this whole succession. This is the young Prince Salim, later Jahangir, with a turban jewel. Here he is in old age with Asaf Khan giving him a sarpesh. Here's the young Shah Jahan with another turban jewel. The Mughals really obsessed about beauty and about aesthetics, not just as an end in itself, but as an aid to sovereignty, as a way of legitimizing their rule. They were, after all, just warlords who'd marched in and conquered. And how do they create an image for themselves as the just, the legitimate rulers? So they build up this whole body of art, which they use as a way of legitimizing their rule, to create this image of splendor. And that for this, they build their palaces, they build their tombs, and they use their art as a way of making them the supreme rulers, the great rulers. The young Shah Jahan in particular bonds with his father, Jahangir, over whom he fights on so many other issues, with their shared love of gems. And Jahangir introduces to court ceremony this idea of the famous thing when they're weighed against jewels and gold at Nowruz. And this becomes the great sort of annual jewel mart. If you are an ambitious noble, the best way to get ahead at court is to, by hook or by crook, find some incredible jewel which you can present to the emperor at Nowruz, and then, quite literally, in a way that perhaps happens in a slightly different form in modern Indian politics, the larger the gift, the more your promotion. And in the case of Jahangir, he says quite literally, if you read in his diary, Jahangirnama, Tuzuki Jahangiri, he says in Nowruz, so-and-so Khan came to me and gave me 2 fantastic spindles from Badakhshan, and I promoted him to a mansab of 5,000 horse. And that's literally how it works. The larger the gift, the more special the stone, the higher you rose in favor at the court. A very effective way of increasing your treasury. And young Shah Jahan, growing up in this jewel-obsessed court, talks about, there's a wonderful description about how, on one occasion, young 20-year-old, beautiful young Prince Karam is sitting at a banquet. This is a description of one of the Portuguese friars who come up to Agra from Goa. He says, he's looking down on this banquet through a lattice, and he says, they brought in the most beautiful dancing girls you could imagine. He says, I've never seen such beautiful women. But Prince Karam did not look up once, because he'd just been given some gems by his uncle, Asaf Khan. And he spent the whole of dinner just playing with these new gems. And so, the Ashwaryas and Deepakas of their day were doing their number. And Prince Karam didn't even look up. It was a terrible waste. And then Jahangir talks with great pride about how his son, one occasion somebody gives an enormous pearl. And young Shah Jahan looks at it and says, there's an exact twin for that in such and such a turban in the treasury. And the turban is brought, and the turban jewel is taken off, and it's compared, and they are exactly twins of each other. And so for Jahangir, as an old man who's despairing in so many ways about his son, this is something he's constantly proud of, his aesthetic eye, his ability to judge and discern a fine jewel. And Shah Jahan, as we know, uses his eye as no other ruler to create images of splendor for himself. But the ultimate thing he does is to create this, the Peacock Throne. Peacock Throne is built soon after Shah Jahan has built the Taj. He's commissioned the new city of Delhi. He's in late middle age. His wife has died. He's already built this extraordinary building. And he's inherited from his father successive Nowruz presents, plus all the loot gathered by Babur and Humayun and so on. He has tier after tier of gems in the treasury, more than they can possibly do anything with. The greatest jewel collection in history. And he lands on this idea of building the Peacock Throne as a way of showing it off. And into the Peacock Throne is put all the greatest gems in the treasury. And in the accounts we have of its building in the Padshah Nama, they mention particularly the great spinels. What they don't mention is the diamonds. It says in general terms it contained many of the finest diamonds ever seen. It doesn't mention them by name. So we don't hear at the time that on the peacock on the top, on its eye, is probably the Kohinoor. But we hear that later, 100 years later when it's in exile. So we can imagine with some degree of certainty that it's up there when the Peacock Throne is built. And it costs 4 times the cost of the Taj, this thing to build. It's the single most expensive piece of furniture in world history. Anyway, it passes on from from Shah Jahan to Aurangzeb, who also, despite being this Puritan in so many ways, did like a bit of glitter. Aurangzeb sits very happily in the Peacock Throne until we get to hopeless old Muhammad Shah Rangila. Now, Muhammad Shah Rangila, as we all know, was not a great ruler, much more interested in playing holy with the dancing girls and that sort of thing. A great cultural figure, starts the Mughal atelier, painting pictures after a gap, after Aurangzeb. He introduces both the sitar and the tabla into court music, which had previously been folk instruments up to then. But it's his great misfortune to be a ruler at the same time as this character, Nadir Shah Afshar. And Nadir Shah is the kind of polar opposite of Muhammad Shah Rangila in almost every way. Muhammad Shah, grand old inherited wealth. Nadir Shah is the son of a leather worker from the Afghan-Iranian border, from that sort of region. You can see even by his dress, austerely dressed. But the one thing he does like, as and shares with Muhammad Shah is a love of fancy jewelry, which he wears a great deal. So Nadir Shah is a classic story of a soldier who rises to the top of the army and then does what we would call today a military coup. He overcomes the ancient Safavids, the people who built Isfahan, and he makes himself ruler of Persia. And then he wants to fight, his two real enemies are the Ottomans and the Russians. The Russians beginning to move south into Persian territories in the Caucasus, and Nadir Shah's determined to defeat them. But he hasn't got the resources. Persia is a poor country. And particularly after the civil wars at the end of the Safavids, there's not much cash. So he decides to go to Delhi, as he tells one French trader, to pluck some golden feathers from the Mughal peacock's tail. And it's actually, amazingly to everyone, a cakewalk. Nadir Shah has spent his entire life in the army, and he's invented the new kind of gizmo of mid or early 18th century warfare, which is a kind of swivel gun, a large jezail, which is so heavy that it can't be carried in battle, but can be mounted with a tripod on a horse. Later generations make it even larger and move it onto camels. But this is an early version of the swivel gun, and it's armor-piercing. It can pierce anything that the Mughals have. So he marches in from Persia. He marches through Afghanistan. He takes Kabul. We always think of Kashmir as being the northern end of the Mughal Empire, but of course it wasn't. The Mughal Empire stretched right up into Afghanistan, and Kashmir was as much the summer capital, Kabul was as much the summer capital as Kashmir. So he captures Kabul, then comes down the Khyber Pass, captures Lahore, and by this stage, Muhammad Shah Rangila, whose empire has already begun to disintegrate, already Nizam ul-Mulk has taken over Hyderabad and is semi-independent, Sadat Ali Khan is already semi-independent in Awadh. But in this last great sort of moment of national crisis, Nizam ul-Mulk comes north. Uday has written about this in his Baji Rao book. Sadat Ali Khan comes in from Awadh, and they converge on the plains of Karnal, where there are 1.5 million men in the Mughal camp, of whom around 750,000 are actually fighting men. A vast Mughal army, heavy armor, huge cavalry battalions, but they're all at loggerheads with each other. Sadat Ali Khan hates Nizam ul-Mulk and vice versa. Both of them don't take Muhammad Shah Rangila at all seriously. Anyway, Sadat Ali Khan, in order to prove his valor, arrives late on the battlefield, but goes straight into action. And Nizam ul-Mulk has built an encampment and is all set to move very cautiously against this great warrior, Nadir Shah, who has defeated previously the Ottomans, who's a famous warrior, but has only 150,000 troops, a fraction of the size of this enormous Mughal army. Anyway, Sadat Ali Khan walks straight into the trap. He marches out of the encampment, his troops already exhausted from the journey from Faizabad, from UP, and they line up on the plain of Karmal, a mile and a half long, this long line of heavy cavalry glinting in the sunlight. They go off into a trot, into a canter, and then into a full-scale gallop. And at the last minute, the Persian heavy cavalry pull aside like a curtain, and there, facing them, are these swivel guns mounted on the horse. And 2 minutes later, the flower of Mughal chivalry is dead on the ground. And that evening, idiotically, Muhammad Shah Rangila accepts an invitation from Nadir Shah to come to dinner. This is Muhammad Shah Rangila, and this is Nadir Shah at dinner at Karnal. And of course, what happens, he goes with just his bodyguard, and at the end of dinner, the bodyguard is disarmed, and the Persians capture the emperor. So there's 1 million men under arms still in the encampment, and there's nothing they can do. The emperor has been captured, and Sadat Ali Khan is dying of wounds, and is also in the Persian camp where he's been captured. So it's looking very dodgy. And then they march into Delhi together, and then then it all goes pear-shaped because the people of Delhi rise up against the Persians who are coming and sort of ogling the girls and so on. And there's this terrible massacre, and Nizam-ul-Mulk has to go with his hands tied with a dupatta and beg Nadir Shah to stop the massacre, which he does, on the condition that I can't remember the figure, was it 20 crore, 25 crore, that Nizam-ul-Mulk produces this sum. So Nizam-ul-Mulk has to loot his own capital to pay this indemnity to get rid of Nadir Shah. And it's a vast sum. And people are tortured. Delhi is divided into quadrants. Each quadrant has to produce so much money. And 2 months later, Nadir Shah goes off with the Peacock Throne, with the Kohinoor embedded in it, plus the accumulated gems amassed by 6 generations of Mughal looting and plunder. And it's the greatest plunder in the history of Indian warfare. The Brits like to think they were quite good at plundering and looting, but we were rank amateurs compared to this lot. So anyway, so off it goes, off to Afghanistan. It's kept near Herat in a citadel specially built for the loot. This huge, sort of almost like it's a container park full of all the wooden crates containing all the loot brought from Delhi. And Nadir Shah marches around killing people, building piles of pyramids, as one does, for another 7 or 8 years. Then finally his own family say this guy's become completely crazed, he's a total psychopath, and they kill him. And the only people who remains loyal to him is a young man who he'd rescued from the dungeons of Kandahar fort. He'd been in prison in Kandahar. And so when Nadir Shah came through and took Kandahar on his way to Delhi, this guy is let out of jail and becomes part of his bodyguard. And he's Ahmed Shah Abdali, who will soon become Ahmed Shah Durrani, the Pearl of Pearls. And according to the Afghan version of events, which may well not be true, but this is what the Afghans say happened, the night that Nadir Shah is assassinated, there's absolute mayhem in the army camp. Men land on the Peacock Throne and start attacking it with swords and daggers and bayonets. Diamonds are scattering in the paths. There's rapine, loot. There's a French doctor who gives a very good account of this evening. Utter terror, people screaming, everyone trying to make off with what they can. And the only people that remain loyal to Nadir Shah is the Afghan bodyguard of Ahmed Shah Abdali. And according to the Afghan version of events, the Siraj al-Tawarikh, which is the great Afghan chronicle of the period, Ahmed Shah Abdali guards the harem of Nadir Shah on this night of murder and pillage. And in the morning, Nadir Shah's chief wife, Chuki, gives him both the Timur ruby and the Kohinoor, which he has already, we hear from this source, taken down from the Peacock Throne, and now is wearing as a bazuband, as an armlet. And so at some point between when Yazidi has spotted the Kohinoor as the eye of the peacock, soon after the conquest of Delhi, and now 7 years later, when Nadir Shah is assassinated, Nadir Shah seems to have taken these 2 jewels down and is wearing them on his arm, left and right, as part of his personal adornment. These 2 gems are given by Chuki to Ahmed Shah Abdali, who rides off the following morning and uses them as collateral to found a new state, Afghanistan. So for Afghans, the Kohinoor is incredibly important to them as the founding raison d'etre, the capital under which Afghanistan was founded. So just like on any Indian rupee note, you have a picture of Mahatma Gandhi as the father of the nation. Ahmed Shah Abdali is that for the Afghans, and the Kohinoor plays this role in their foundation story, which is why they mind about it so much, and why they regard their claim as preeminent. Just as Nadir Shah's ownership of it is why the Iranians feel it's an Iranian gem. So wherever it's go, this diamond is sort of, attaching itself to various peoples. Anyway, Ahmed Shah Abdali, as we all know, marches around matching Nadir Shah's powers of skulls and even excelling them, comes down, fights the Battle of Panipat, which again there's a certain author in the room that knows little about this, defeats the Marathas, leaving the vacuum which will create the dissonance which allows the East India Company to march in eventually, making the opening for colonialism. And even as this is happening, poor old Ahmad Shah Abdali, this all-powerful conqueror, is being defeated by an enemy that he cannot fight, which is a horrible gangrenous growth on his nose. And by the time he fights Panipat, the sources say that he's wearing half his face is covered with a gold and silver mask, like Robocop or something, into which is studded these gems. And by the time, about 5 years after this, after Panipat, by the mid-1760s, maggots are falling out of his nose onto his food as he's eating. A nasty fate for anyone. And we have these accounts. There's a wonderful account of a wandering sadhu called Purn Puri, who encounters, he has his hand up the whole time. He's made a vow that he won't put his hand down. So this guy is wandering around going to see the holy Hindu sites in Afghanistan when he bumps into Ahmad Shah Abdali's caravan and is brought to see the emperor. And the emperor says, "Have you got any cure for my nose?" And he says that he says, "After what you've done in India, how can anyone cure you?" or something. He gives him a very undiplomatic response, as sadhus sometimes do. But Ahmad Shah Abdali doesn't cut his head off or anything, and goes off and slinks off back to Kandahar to die. So the Kohinoor passes from Ahmad Shah Abdali down to his son, who is Timur Shah, who's a kind of dwarf, who needs a jeweled mounting step to get onto his horse. And then Timur Shah, the empire contracts a bit. Then it passes on to his son. This is Ahmad Shah Abdali, who, this is not a dwarf from The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. This isn't. This is Shah Shuja ul Mulk, who was the last of the Duranis. And he tries to recover his empire. He fails. He's defeated by his own nobles. He flees off into exile, where he's captured by one of his nobles and shoved in prison in Kashmir. But his wife has got the Kohinoor, Mukta Begum, and she goes off to the new power, the new kid on the block, who is a Sikh ruler called Ranjit Singh, who's just taken Lahore. And she makes a deal with him, and she says, "Spring my husband from prison in Kashmir, and I will give you this gem." And Ranjit Singh was famously ugly. He surrounded himself with beautiful Sikh sardars, but he himself was always very simply dressed in white pajamas. But he loved big, glittery jewels. And he's very, very taken with this offer, and he does do exactly what Mukta Begum suggests. He goes off and he conquers Kashmir. And he captures Shah Shuja, brings him back to Lahore, and then he says, "So where's my diamond?" Shah Shuja says, "I didn't say you could have my diamond." So Ranjit Singh then tortures Shah Shuja's son in front of him, according to Shah Shuja's autobiography. And eventually he hands over the diamond. So by this stage, it's come back to India. It left in 1739. This is now, 1812, 1815. Shah Shuja's fallen from power. Kashmir's been taken. And the stone is now in Lahore with Ranjit Singh, who wears it on his arm. So the Kohinoor is still a double act at this point with the Timur ruby. And they're both fixed up in bazubans to be worn on the arm. But at this period, for the first time, the Kohinoor begins to take precedence over the Timur ruby. Because in Mughal taste, the ruby is the one that everyone's interested in, the one that all the chroniclers referred to. But the Sikhs take the Indic gemological position that diamonds are the fancier of the two. And during the course of his reign, Ranjit Singh begins to wear this diamond alone. So when the Brits begin coming to see Ranjit Singh at his court, he's wearing the Kohinoor on his arm. And there's a whole variety of travellers' accounts by people like Alexander Burns, Bukhara Burns, and other, Victor Jacquemont, the French traveller, all of whom describe this as the biggest gem in the world. In actual fact, it wasn't. The Timur ruby, which is now by this stage found its way to Catherine the Great in Russia, sorry, not the Timur ruby, the Great Mogul diamond, which has found its way to Catherine the Great, now known in Russia as the Orlov diamond, after the guy who bought it in Amsterdam, and the Kohinoor, both probably larger. But the Brits don't know this, and they haven't seen those diamonds. So the Brits begin to create this story about the Kohinoor being the supreme diamond. And this is one that gets amplified when it ends up in British hands a little bit later. So this is the first time that you're really beginning to hear about the Kohinoor in a great deal of literature. There is not, as I say, a single, solid, secure reference to the Kohinoor in any Mughal source. Extraordinary fact, but it's true. There's reference to the what we call Babur's diamond, which is another very large diamond, which Babur talks about, but there is no evidence that Babur's diamond is the Kohinoor. It could have been any of the other ones and was probably the Orlov, modern gemologists believe. So, Ranjit Singh builds up the Sikh Empire, creates this great empire from the Punjab, a very multicultural empire with Sikh warriors under the leadership of a Muslim vizier, the Fakir family, very good and just rule, extraordinary army led by French-trained ex-Napoleonic generals, incredibly efficient. But when he dies, Ranjit Singh wants this diamond. Already, the diamond is associated with so much bloodshed that people have begun talking about it as being the Saimantika gem of the Bhagavad Purim. And therefore, probably for this reason, Ranjit Singh thinks it should go to some great Vaishnav Krishna temple. And on his deathbed announces that he wants it to go to Jagannath in Puri, and leaves orders for it to go there. But as he's dying and has a whole succession of strokes, he can no longer speak, the diamond has disappeared. No one knows where it is. And Ranjit Singh dies, is cremated, and only when his son Karak Singh has assumed control does the treasurer, Beli Misaram, produce it from where he's been hiding it and gives it to the heir, believing, he says, that it wasn't the personal property of Ranjit Singh, but it belonged to the Khalsa. And it wasn't Ranjit Singh's to give it to Puri. It was the stone that represents. So by this stage, the Kohinoor is becoming very famous. For the first time, this is now a very famous stone. But we now get what I describe as the roulette wheel of death, that the Kohinoor begins to work its horrible magic at accelerated speed. Now, Karak Singh is widely believed to be a blockhead. He's a handsome chap, but unlike his father, who is incredibly clever and brilliant and a great leader, Karak Singh is a drunk and an opium addict. And so quite soon in his reign, someone in his court begins putting white lead into his food, which leads to him suffering terrible lesions and blisters and dying 9 months later in incredible agony, having been poisoned to death. So luckily his son is on hand, who's everything that his father isn't. Like his grandfather, Ranjit Singh, he's more handsome than Ranjit Singh, plus he's dashing, he's brilliant, he's young, he's clever. Everyone's thrilled. All the hopes of the Khalsa rest on Nihal Singh. But he doesn't last more than a day on the Gaddi, because instead, as he's coming back from the cremation ground where he's been cremating his father, an arch collapses on his head, and he's taken badly wounded into the fort, where he's found a few hours later with his head completely caved in. So a second assassination attempt. The gates of the fort are closed, and his mother, Chand Kaur, takes control. And she, now Nihal Singh's widow, is pregnant. And she locks the doors of the gate, and there's great hopes that a male heir will be born. And a few months later, a male child is brought forth, but stillborn. So there's a great sort of sigh of horror in Lahore. And the half-brother, Sher Singh, who's this kind of, the man you least want to sit next to on the Delhi metro, the kind of man-spreading, gym-going, sort of hunky, Sher Singh attacks the fort of Lahore, besieges it, and you can see he's this big sort of he-man, and eventually Chand Kaur says, look, fine, I surrender, we're not going to have a fight here, I'll go off, if you give me, allow me to go to my palace outside in the Punjab, and I will go into retirement, and everything looks as if it's agreed happily. But a month later, Chand Kaur is having her hair brushed by her maids. When they put down the hairbrushes, take out a pair of bricks and pound her skull in, on the orders of, the two women, because they then get their hands and feet cut off as punishment for this. But one of the chroniclers says, but they should have cut out their tongues, because they say, but the Maharaja ordered us to do it. And so anyway, so Sher Singh is on the throne, but only for a few months, you'll be surprised to hear. And he has the Kohinoor very prominently. I can't see which side it is. Yeah, here we are. Here's the Kohinoor on his arm, this big, beefy, gym-going arm. Because his two cousins come to see him, and they say, oh, Sher Singh, we've got a brilliant present for you. This is a new thing, very good for hunting. It's a double-barreled shotgun. Oh, it's gone off in your chest. And the second barrel's gone off too. And so poor old Sher Singh, now the fourth victim of this in very short succession, leaving only this sort of sweet cherubic child left, the last son of Ranjit Singh, to survive this bloodbath, and this is the young Dulip Singh. And Dulip Singh is really the creature, of course, of his mother, Rani Jindal. And Rani Jindal, a great beauty, as you can see, a fantastic Sikh Sherni, and is actually the daughter of the kennel keeper. She's the lowest caste. She's from the bottom of the heap in the palace hierarchy. Ranjit Singh had taken her to bed when she was, I think, only 15, and he was 80-something. And there was a great deal of gossip that Dulip Singh, as a result, is unlikely to have been Ranjit Singh's. Whether that's the case or not, it becomes a point of political dissension. And almost immediately, there is a faction of the Sikh court which is acting against Rani Jindal and Dulip Singh and trying to come to a talk of further coups. And by this stage, the dissenting generals are busy talking of coming to an accommodation with this man, Lord Dalhousie. And Dalhousie is the sort of Boris Johnson of his day. He's this sort of incredibly untrustworthy old Etonian, incredibly ambitious. He wants to be foreign secretary. Viceroy isn't enough. And when he defeats the Sikhs, we got the slides in the wrong order, at the Battle of Chilianwala in 1847, I think, he, without order, he, of course, is the servant of the East India Company, a corporate body, a financial organization. He does not represent the government of India. He represents the directors of the East India Company. But in the Articles of Surrender, Lord Dalhousie, ambitious for his future, wanting to come back from being viceroy and become foreign secretary, makes as Article 4 of the Treaty of Lahore that the diamond called the Kohinoor shall go to Queen Victoria. He doesn't consult the directors on this. And the directors, of course, are incredibly pissed off, as they rather like the Kohinoor. And they've put the money up for this war. It's their soldiers that have fought it. They don't want their anyway, it's in the treaty. There's nothing that can be done. So they put a brave face in it. So the poor old Dulip Singh has to hand the diamond over, and it goes into Lord Dalhousie's pocket, and he then hands it on to, what's he called? I'm having a senior moment. John Lawrence, who's the governor of the Punjab. Now, John Lawrence is an evangelical Christian, God squad, likes singing hymns, all that sort of thing. Couldn't care less about diamonds. Totally non-material, not ambitious, doesn't know a diamond from a ruby or a pearl from an emerald. Puts it in his pocket and forgets about it. And a month later or a week later, whatever it is, the courier from FedEx turns up, or Blue Dart, and says, delivery for Lord Dalhousie, 1 Kohinoor diamond. And he does that thing, when you've lost your mobile phone or your wallet, he can't find it. He just fought this war, there was bloodshed, thousands killed, and no one could find the Kohinoor. So he, upends the floorboards, looks under the sofa, what was I wearing that day, all that old stuff you normally do, looks in the pockets of all his old trousers, can't find it. And finally, he says to the footman, "Are you quite sure that there was no this diamond?" He says, "No, sir, no, absolutely not." He said, "It was in a little box in cotton wool." I said, "Oh, that piece of glass! I nearly threw it away." He said, "But I put it in a drawer." So the Kohinoor is found and is dispatched to Bombay, where Lord Dalhousie has sent his nephew to personally escort the diamond to London. By now, of course, after all these killings in the Sikh court, this diamond has got a terrible reputation for causing mayhem. So Lord Dalhousie makes the decision he won't send it on a proper government gunboat or something. He won't dispatch the navy to deliver it. He'll just quietly put it on a ship with his nephew. And the nephew will have it in a safe, which is in another safe, and no one will know about it except I think 2 bodyguards that go with the nephew. So they find someone at some point puts the mark on the sloop Medea, and the sloop leaves Bombay. And within 2 days of leaving Bombay, the first sailor on board dies of cholera. And then one after another, after another, after another. And by the time they're getting to Mauritius, there's only about half the crew left. So they try and land in Mauritius, but the Mauritians threaten to sink the ship and blow it out of the water, and they declare it a plague ship. So these poor guys have to limp on. Soon after they've crossed the equator, they hit one of the largest typhoons in 20 years, and the masts are broke, and this thing limps on. And by the end, there are only about 5 sailors left, and Lord Dalhousie's nephew is a sort of emaciated. Any of you seen that film Nosferatu, where the ghost ship sails into Amsterdam with only the captain? It's that sort of thing. And then it continues. The story gets even more remarkable. As it enters British water, the Prime Minister, Peel, is riding on Primrose Hill. He's an ex-cavalryman. He knows all about horses. He's thrown from the horse. The horse lands on him, and he dies. Then it arrives at Portsmouth, and a courier sends it on to Buckingham Palace. As the courier is heading towards Queen Victoria, a madman steps out of the crowd with a gold-tipped tape and wallops Queen Victoria over the head, and it hits her on the top of her temple, between her eye and her temple. So when she receives the Kohinoor, her entry in her diary that day has 1 paragraph on the Kohinoor and 7 on her black eye, and she's got a great big shiner. So it's not going well. It's not looking good. We'll skip. We're running out of time. Anyway, so fast forward 3 years, and Queen Victoria lends the diamond to the Great Exhibition. And the Great Exhibition in the Crystal Palace in the centre of Hyde Park is the high point of Victorian imperialism. The British are showing off their empire to the world. And the centerpiece of the exhibition is the Kohinoor diamond. And a man called Mr. Chubb, who invents the Chubb lock, is commissioned to make a cage for the Kohinoor. And it's in the center of this glass thing. But everyone is disappointed, because by now there's been so much press about the Kohinoor and its deadly tendencies. But when it actually appears, it's in an old-fashioned Mughal cut. The Mughals like their stones in their natural shape. And the Kohinoor, as its name suggests, is the shape of a mountain. It's like the shape of Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, the big sort of dome, and then it comes down to a tail. It's not at all symmetrical. And by this stage in the West, people are used to nice, neat, brilliant cut, symmetrical diamonds which look perfect. At the moment in Delhi, we've got the Nizam's jewels on show, and the Jacob diamond is there, and it's a perfect diamond. It looks, it's a diamond shape. It's totally symmetrical. It's perfect. The Kohinoor is none of those things. It's a mess. It's a big lump. And so Prince Albert, who's behind the Great Exhibition, has to try and find a way of making it shine. So first of all, they put it in a tent, and they put all sorts of gas lights behind it to try and make it sparkle. But all they've done is create Britain's first sauna. And all these Victorian ladies in busks walk in, and it's already like a greenhouse in the Crystal Palace because it's midsummer. And they walk into the tent, and they all faint, one after another. And literally a quarter of the British population over the course of this year pay their, whatever it is, £5 to see this exhibition. And one after another of them have been carried out the far end on stretchers because of Prince Albert's sauna tent. So at the end of it, everyone's rather sort of irritated with the Kohinoor, and Prince Albert makes the decision they've got to cut it to make it look like a diamond, not like a big glittering lump. So they pull out of retirement the Duke of Wellington, who, of course, first made his names in these parts, fighting Daulat Rao Scindia's Marathas. Now, as an old man, having defeated Napoleon, is brought out of retirement to make the first cut. And everyone has told Albert, you can't cut this diamond. It's got a flaw down the middle of it. If you do it, it's carbon. It'll just go up in smoke. If you cut it against the grain, this is not a diamond that can be cut. But he finds one senior jeweler in Amsterdam who thinks he can do it. And it goes in, I'm always bad at it because I think it's 195 carats into the cut. And it comes out the far side at 95 carats. It's lost more than half its weight. But it sparkles. It looks like a diamond. Anyway, since this day, the rumor has spread that the Kohinoor, the version of this legend of its curse that's reached the British royal family, is it cannot be worn by a male. So after Queen Victoria, no other monarch has ever worn it. And it becomes part of the crown of the Prince Consort, which means that the last time it was seen on public display in a ceremonial situation was the Queen Mother's funeral. Anyone here can go and see it. It's on show in the Tower of London. You pay your £5, whatever it is. And because there's so many angry Desis, Iranians, Afghans and everything, often fighting with each other in front of this stone and shouting, chor, chor, and loot, loot, and all this thing. They put 2 conveyor belts running quite fast past this thing. So you get onto it and go whipping past it out. Wallop. And it's one of the few places in London where you can see a whole bunch of Indians moonwalking backwards, shouting expletives at an inanimate object. It's a very entertaining day out. I really recommend it. But the funniest thing is they always get the wrong stone, because in the stone, in the same cabinet, are the 2 Cullinan diamonds, which are the largest diamonds in the world. And the Cullinan is the size of a rugby ball. It's an enormous diamond. And the poor old Kohinoor, which is only the size of a hen's egg, it gets ignored. So everyone sits there shouting at the wrong time as their big whisk backwards. Anyway, the diamond now is in the Tower of London. The next time it'll be up for ceremonial occasion will be presumably the coronation of King Charles III, with Camilla as his queen. And if that doesn't finish off the British royalty... Thank you. Done.